Welcome to the Funnel Reboot podcast with your host, Glenn Schmeltzley. Let's get into today's show.
Hey, Glenn here. Welcome to Funnel Reboot. Today we're going to talk about... Hang on a sec. I got to make a show on some big marketing trend. Racking my brain here, but I got nothing. Hey, computer, I need to do a podcast on some new technology used by marketers. Can you name one?
What about voice marketing?
Okay. Why is voice marketing on the rise?
For starters, Amazon, Apple, Google, Microsoft, and OpenAI all have voice capability. And they sell it to clients who embed it at their call center, store kiosk, website, or inside the products they make. As an example, there are now speakers with AI assistants present in people's cars, their phones, and present in several places around their home.
But are people actually interacting with companies using a voice interface?
Surveys have shown that most people have gone from resisting to experimenting, to exploring, to using it as an essential tool in their lives. The more places they experience it, the more people will simply expect it.
Is there an expert I can go talk to about voice?
Yes, you should talk to Susan Westwater.
Who is she?
After spending over 20 years in marketing agencies, Susan Westwater became co-founder and CEO of a consultancy named Pragmatic Digital. Susan has talked and written on the role voice and conversational AI plays in marketing and business strategy. The first book she co-authored is called Voice Strategy. The newest book she co-authored is Voice Marketing, which came out in 2023.
I just pinged her, and she's able to come on the show. Hey, this is a great topic. I'm so glad I thought of it.
That's what you always say.
Now I know how Plankton's computer wife, Karen, feels.
What did you say?
I just said you're welcome. Enjoy your talk with Susan.
Let's go talk to Susan Westwater. Susan Westwater, welcome to Funnel Reboot.
Thank you for having me on.
I'm really glad to have you on. So there's an area that you have helped with some co-authors to make, I think, a landmark book about. Can you please tell me the title and the subtitle of the book you've written?
Yes, it is called Voice Marketing, Harnessing the Power of Conversational AI to drive customer engagement. I think that's the right name.
Oh, that's a mouthful.
Yes.
All right. Perfect. Yeah. Well, you scored 100% on memorization.
I always, because it is a mouthful, I sometimes struggle where is it driving? Is it harnessing?
Yeah. So we'll get into, all the various uses, but I do want to take just a quick moment, and it's almost like we need to remind people of how ever present the ability to do voice marketing and have voice experiences is. First off, and I really had a duh moment when I read in the book, you said, if you think about how hardware, like technology, is made, it can be hard to put a screen on something or, even, like a augmented reality experience, but it's almost nothing to put audio capability into a product, and you can make it a really small product. So that's why we have so many products around that can see us and sometimes talk back, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And scientifically speaking, there's data that shows it's faster to talk than it is to type.
Yeah.
And so it just makes it easier. The friction drops a lot on a lot of levels. So it makes a lot of sense in a lot of places where hands-free voice control is really important.
Yes. So that's kind of the hardware side. And on the software side, there is, and I was bowled over again by how long a history of computers being able to understand voice, AVR, I think you called it. And, that has been around for decades. They've been able to more recently, translate what we're saying. They've been able to start talking back to us. So it is turning up everywhere in our lives. But I think we commit a sin of thinking that it's still low tech. Um, any comments on, why you think we sometimes overlook this powerful technology that has come together from various places over a long time, and its time on center stage seems to be here, but we seem to overlook that.
I'll tell you why. It's because its roots, right? Its roots are phone trees and automated attendants. And it's pretty, I mean, that's what, the 1970s.
Yep.
So as we think about that, that has become a part in how, I don't know how many in your audience, but I assume most are saying the minute you start to hear that phone tree, you just start saying operator or agent, because they haven't been elegant. They were low tech. They got the job done, but they weren't amazing. And I think that's part of the challenge, is that for a long time, the technology was limited. And we're finally getting to a point where the technology can let us be as creative and have as an interesting an interface that actually is more than a robot and is more than very specific command control phrases. Obviously, the world has opened up since November of last year with ChatGPT, opening the conversation of, no, see, this isn't nearly, this is a lot more seamless, a lot more, I like to use the word elegant, of how we're able to do that. But I'll be honest with you, like even in the primary research that I've been a part of, when we ask people about voice search, consumers will say, no, I don't do voice search, not like I do with Google. And then the next question we always ask is, so do you ask your assistant on your phone or on your desk, do you ask it questions? Oh yeah, all the time. I think it's just because we don't even think of it as a formalized thing, because voice is such a thing that comes naturally that it has a tendency to be like, well, that's just a fiber of my world. Let's just go with it. And so I think that combination has been what sort of made folks kind of pause and sometimes overlook it. Like you said, there's a lot more sophistication, and in some ways, and then in other ways, it's kind of not. I'll be honest with you. And we can talk a little bit about that, because we can talk about that in the book.
Tech,
yeah.
low tech. Yeah.
Exactly.
It's disarming, but I guess that's only at the user's level. I mean, if we pivot around and look at it from the technology, especially technology that is AI enabled, marketers had better see what new opportunities this opens.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it starts there with the questions we ask. How things are looked at from a search perspective, like voice SEO or conversational search. I think it's not so new, but it's evolved so much that it's like, what do we call that term? Yeah. Cause it always needs a label, right? Is how do we take advantage of that? Because it's almost like SEO is new again. And that's exciting. It's super exciting. Now you have to have your house in order to take advantage of it and add that on. And I think that's the other side of it. But it's everything from, you don't have to go take $1 million and go build a massive voice-enabled assistant. There are places where you can approachably add voice-enabled technology, or make sure that your marketing messages or your pieces are accessible or discoverable via voice. And I think that's kind of the other part of it too, is it's making sure that you're thinking through those simple use cases a little bit. So that way then you can be there and like be there when they're looking for you, right message, right person, right time. It still applies.
Right. I take from that, you're kind of saying, be aware as a marketer that the content that you have, that the ecosystems which support voice are doing things to your content, and you had best be aware of that.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, the longest time, one of my favorite things, and now it's changed a little bit, would be go ask your Alexa or your Google Assistant about a major brand. And suddenly you'd hear, here's what I found. Well, what that means is anytime you hear Siri or any of them say, here's what I found, that means it went to Wikipedia, because the tech companies behind these things say, I cannot have it say, well, I don't know that, or I can't find that. So here's what I found means there's nothing there. So I just had to give up and go to Wikipedia.
Right.
And there were major brands for a very long time, like Coca-Cola, like General Motors, like some of the big brands where you're like, you've spent millions and suddenly you've acquiesced in a moment when someone asks.
You would shudder if that happened on a Google search.
Exactly. And as we're learning and seeing that businesses, I mean, and we can look a little bit towards consumer behavior, because if that's something you do in your everyday life, chances are it's going to bleed into how it comes into your work life. If people are asking these questions or doing search this way, and it's, I think the last number I saw was a staggering 92% of people who use voice assistants have been using that. And that's a 2022 number. 2023 numbers will be coming out in November, because we will be running that study again. Essentially, there's a lot of people asking. 57% of US, of Americans, I know you're in Canada, but the bleed over, because that's where our data's from. They use voice technology at least weekly, if not daily. And that's a massive number. That number jumps every year. So again, I'll be excited to see when we get our data in the next week or so of what that looks like now. But I think preliminary, it might be around 61%. So it's hitting numbers that are quite staggering of that opportunity. So it's something to think about. It's a channel, and depending on how you want to do it, whether it be through your mobile device, think about how many mobile devices are out there. Think about that reach. And if you think about how much advertising costs to get that same reach, it's kind of exciting to be able to, hey, I can show up there. I can be there, and I'm not going to be spending a Super Bowl budget to do that.
No, we're close. So based on those numbers that you're saying, I mean, what strikes me is that kind of, the diffusion of the technology and it coming around everywhere. Our behavior is no doubt changing. When you're telling me nearly 2/3 of people, are regularly using, what that highlights to me is, and this was pointed out in the book, that there's uneven development, that this is an interesting channel, if I compare it to other channels, that, it's like there are complete sectors that seem to not even know it's here. And there are others that are leaning in and just cleaning up.
Yeah, for sure. There are, like, banking and finance have jumped ahead. Now, the interesting thing with that is a lot of them host their own, because why? The most important thing, and I'm just going to bring it up here because no conversation about voice and conversational ever doesn't have this, is the whole data privacy portion of it.
Correct. Who
controls the data? Who, as we're looking at some of this information, is it de-identified? Yes, it is. I can assure you. And a lot of this information, but what it comes down to is banking, restaurant industry is starting to really embrace it because we have labor challenges. There are tons of things. Almost every industry can benefit from it. Automotive has kind of led the charge a bit. Domino's led the charge as well. What started as command control or ways to order pizzas back in the 2011 and early 2000s is now becoming full-on conversation. So it's more than just you have to say a secret phrase. It's understanding what we're saying. But every industry can benefit, but there are some that have jumped ahead. And there are examples from across consumer packaged goods as well as I've actually seen where investors, and for investor relations and things, how can I ask that question without having to type? Or how do I internally use that so I don't have to get lost on SharePoint? That's been an amazing use case that works with internally and externally.
Sure. So, and let's stop right there, because I read a very cool part where it was explaining how in places like insurance, I will break out in hives if you ask me, Glenn, what does your, homeowner's insurance policy say about X? I have zero interest in going through it. But if you told me that I could just ask my smart speaker to look at it and pull that for me, and the fact that it's even going to understand if I didn't use a word which verbatim, I called it something different than what the policy clause calls it. We are now at a point where that can just surface for you, and it can be read out to you, and you can get your answer. Like, why wouldn't you do that?
Right, exactly, 100%. And it's understanding the meaning and the intent, not just the single word. And that's incredibly exciting. And that a lot of that is from the large language model technology that is out there from interpretation. Not everything is generative. It's also how do I process this natural language understanding? So you don't always have to be bleeding edge. I mean, it's still cutting edge. But you can have a way of having some of those controls and those places so that you actually then, and this is the really cool part when you are able to capture that, you now know exactly how your audience is talking about that. Because they aren't using that, they're not using legalese. They're talking about it. Well, what is that clause or what is that thing? And I'm talking about my problem the way I know, which is a superpower. Like that's constant research. So you're not only serving them really well, but you're also getting additional data so you can continue to make that better, not just in a voice experience, but everywhere in your other channels at the untouch points.
Yes. So you've been hinting at it that when they are asking our brand for information, like the distinction here is you talked about how it will revert to Wikipedia if, let's say, our brand doesn't share anything special that is optimized for voice. So it goes out, it grabs something off of our website or Wikipedia and says it back. Or it might turn to one of our competitors and get it from theirs. But let's dig in for a moment into what we have to do to climb up that staircase to give a more customer aimed experience with our own internal content. I'm thinking of skills or actions as they're called. So you mentioned, and I just wanted to circle back to it, that, a key phrase or some simple name that we can give it, that these are things that we can use inside of the skill and action entity to welcome someone into our little corner of the voice universe. Talk to me more about that.
Sure. So, I always like to call it using a metaphor of bars. We live in now, we're moving towards a world of call brands, right? If I order a vodka soda, I will get I'll get a generic answer about how to make a vodka soda. But if I ask for at a bar, I would like a Belvedere and soda, I will then get that specific piece. It's just kind of like how we're learning about prompt engineering as well, of what you ask for and the specificity. What's nice and interesting about voice is that, when you're typing, you have a tendency to, what is the smallest amount of inputs I can do to get the answer I want?
We talk in like a haiku when we're especially typing. Yeah,
exactly. And we won't even talk about when it was Boolean and you had your capital ands and all that. I mean, it was unnatural. Yeah, it was unnatural. Especially there's an information architect who talks about the hunter-gatherer and how that is search is not hunter-gathering. We're moving, voice lets us get closer to that hunter-gatherer, because let's say if I'm asking about a sports car, I'm not going to go up to someone and go sports car, or where can I get a sports car? It's where's the nearest Corvette dealership near me? I'm looking for a red one. And that's the power of that and being there. So it's not about keywords per se. It's about phrases. So when we're talking about being found, we can use invocations when we're talking to our assistants to say, hey, I want to engage with this particular business. What can you tell me about that business? But to be found, what we also can do is look at those. What are the questions I want to answer? What are the conversations I want to be a part of? And so sometimes that might be specific things like insurance policy details, or what do you have? But it also might be making sure that you've got your featured snippets, that you've got all of that information into how do I pick the best insurance policy for me? Or around me is another. Google My Business is a very important piece because that will put things out through there as well. So those are the ways that you're able to move up there. Now, you can build a voice experience that lives on Alexa, and that lives now. Google has since retired actions. They've sunsetted them in July of this year. They've now made that part of, basically what that means is there's no equivalent on Google of just a standalone voice experience. The push has been to push you more towards, how do I voice enable my actual app action? How do I make my mobile experience, or I guess even desktop, make that voice enabled, so that I'm combining those two things. And it's basically bringing voice much closer into the fold, quite honestly.
It's just a mode.
Yes, it's a channel. It is
Yeah.
a whole other channel. I mean, and because we do speak differently, we ingest things differently. So those are the ways of, by being there and being in those different places, of making it possible for someone to use your voice on website. And then that content then becomes available and searchable. Even like this podcast, like Google has already said, we index podcast transcripts, and we will pull those snippets and we will put them if someone asks a question, if that's better. So it is all about that first getting seen. And then it's also, I'll be honest, is letting your audience know it exists. When we first started out, we had, discover, and then we had design and develop, where our developers, and we actually create the experience. Then we're like launch, and that's great, launch and iterate, because people never do what we expect them to do, or there's always, it's not a launch it and leave it more often than not. So how do we improve upon what we learn? And then we realized there were a lot of, experiments that weren't really thriving, and we couldn't, and we were talking with colleagues and peers and saying, what's going on? Oh, well, how did you get traffic to it? Well, we just built it. And if we recall back to like when websites first came out, we had to help people understand what a URL was. How do I go to a website? I know it's really.
And then we had it again with social coming on.
Exactly.
All those icons.
Exactly. Like, what do they mean? So we're in this phase right now where not everyone's going to assume you have a voice enabled way of doing things. They're going to assume, we can't assume that, because it isn't like, how long was it? Oh, hey, I want to check their website. You just put in the brand name and then it shows up. We don't have that quite yet. So I've got to after I put my blood, sweat, and tears into adding, not too much blood, but putting that together to create this voice experience that I've thought about this audience. How do I let them know it exists? So we actually added a step up where we actually separated out launch and iterate, because it's like launch takes a marketing plan of its own. And hey, we're marketers, so we're pretty good at that, right?
Yep.
Making sure and that doesn't mean first you get $1 million and you buy all this radio. What it does mean is, all those times that I've always said, well, you can go to our website, make sure you include that your voice experience is there. Make it part of your ecosystem and embrace it. Because it doesn't cost much to put it on the bottom of an email or add it to ways to connect. Like that's ways that you can put it in there.
Right.
That just subtly tells folks to get there. But that's the important thing too, of making sure that if you're going to create this content, put these experiences together, that it's known. I mean, it starts with awareness. There's folks in the community who call it discoverability. Discoverability to me makes me think of an island that explorers have to find. No, that makes it a passive problem. That's a passive problem. Let's make it a marketing problem. How do we drive awareness? How do we drive someone to where we want them to do? And again, as marketers, we know how to do that. So it's just making sure we include that in there. That's how you're going to be able to drive that traffic. And yeah.
So you have, and I mean, you're pulling stuff from the book. The part there you just alluded to was the multi-step process that you guys endorse for how someone can go from just an idea to actually having a voice experience. And in the launch one, correct me if I'm wrong, but you did say that someone would probably want to seek out expertise like yours or someone else's to list it inside of the Amazon and the Google experiences. Much like if they built a mobile app, they would need to list it on the App Store. And one thing, one thought that occurred was sometimes brands have individual pushback because they say, well, but I'm driving them to a place where my competitors also are. And I thought one point that the book made rather well was, well, sure, but if you foster more use of the ecosystem, and these are really big companies behind the ecosystem, I mean, they're not going away, then it's going to get more people to use things. And if your tool is a good tool, if you have a good experience, then it works to your benefit. So a little bit of a head fake here on people who are thinking, oh, well, I don't want to be too noisy about the fact that I've built a voice experience. You convinced me the opposite.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And honestly, yes, your competitors will be there, but not every competitor is there. A lot of times, I mean, it's still early. To me, it feels like it's been forever. But to those who are just learning about this, imagine if you knew more about SEO before SEO became a thing.
Right.
That's the opportunity we have right now because there aren't paid ads yet on most of these assistants. You can't do paid voice things because, well, they haven't figured out how do you call it promoted results as opposed to not. And so the FCC kind of has some opinions about that. And that means that if you're a number 2 player or number 3 player and you've created a better experience with the thoughtfulness of making sure that it's got the right levers to drive traffic to it, you have an opportunity to claim that space in a way and serve and be able to not only serve your customers, but maybe start to eat into market share. And be able to kind of take down that 900-pound gorilla that you can't outspend. This is one of those opportunities. And I do get here sometimes of we can't even get social right. Are you kidding me? We are struggling to keep our website updated. Now you're talking to me about another channel. The good news is you can use the content and the thinking that you've used to build the strategies for those other channels can inform what you're doing in conversational AI. So that way, then you're not starting from scratch. You're not as behind as you think. In some things, maybe, but reality is that there are some things that proper marketing acumen still applies. And I know my audience, I know what they want to do. I know what I need them to do. Let's figure out how we do that with voice, which becomes a really fun thing. And then you have more often than not, a lot of times it's more about prioritizing what's the most important thing I need them to do because there are so many ways that you can use it.
Right. Yeah. You see how much is possible once you really jump in.
Yeah.
I do want to jump into more of that and some of the ways that you explain the process and especially the early steps, because there are some things that we might fumble on if we don't get those right. But before we do that, we're going to take a really quick break. Let me step away for a second to note the information that goes beyond what you're listening to now. I'm talking about our social media presence. On social, you'll see show-related updates about our guests. You'll see what's happening behind the scenes. Or you can simply talk to me. There are already 740 people who have connected with the show's social pages. I love seeing new people follow, and I've really loved how lately a few of you have posted positive comments about the show. It encourages me in making this podcast the best it can be. So find Funnel Reboot on LinkedIn or Instagram or X. Click follow and maybe say hi. Thanks a lot. Let's get back to the show. In returning to this, Susan, I think a lot of marketers who were perhaps overwhelmed in the early part can relax a bit more because we're now going to talk more about the stuff that is second nature to them. We're going to talk about how you're going to look through the life cycle of your work with a customer, and you're going to simply reverse engineer the things that you need for voice from the things that you already know about them.
Yes.
And so when it comes to that, maybe let's look at, maybe we'll begin with the end in mind. If I'm working on this and I'm thinking a quarter or a few quarters from now, we need to be able to report to our management team how we're doing with this. You point out some very granular KPIs, and I'll just highlight, kind of a few good ones. You mentioned SEO earlier. One of the things that you may be able to say if you've done this right is we figured out how to get a greater percentage of people to take a conversion on our website by using voice. Mm-hmm. Another one was we were able to reduce the number of clicks and the number of times that somebody had to ask a question to the point where they seemed to be satisfied. And one I really love, which is I wasn't thinking of at all when you said it, was how could our net promoter score, be improved by people who have simply had a good experience, had some basic issue that they were grappling with, quickly and readily solved through voice. Now, I mean, are those all really possible, or are you just, whistling Dixie?
Oh, no. I've actually, I've either had to share them. I've had to work against those numbers and looking at those ways. And that, in this world of connected IoT, we can use UTMs and we can use that tagging to show us where they went and where they go. So that's one way of doing that. And if you aren't using UTMs, you should be, I'll be honest, because that's letting us see. That's the beauty of digital, isn't it?
And the other tools we know, Search Console, Google Analytics, this information floods into those. So
yeah,
it's not this foreign thing. We don't have to learn a new interface necessarily.
No. Now I will say, and I always bring it up because there's a small legion of us that keep shouting it out from the rooftops. Without the UTM codes or without some of those other pieces in place, if you rely on Search Console, voice traffic is still registered as direct. So when you look at your direct number, you can extrapolate, oh, the direct number went higher. I'll pretend that's voice. There's better ways of getting at that. Every time I talk to anyone from Google, I'm always like, when are you going to let me talk about that other channel? When are you going to, and I was like, no. This is important because it is such a traffic pipeline. And that's the thing too. I mean, and then there's things like Alexa has send to phone, where you can literally send a link and say, do you want me to send you a link to that? Now I've just got you straight to the inquiry form on the website. There are ways to make that very direct. And that, again, to your point, I'm going to take away some of the mental burden of you thinking about how do I get to the information I want and make it possible for them to just shortcut those pieces. And some of those things we know going in, and that's why we do the discovery phase. Yep. I will admit, and some of my web friends and UXers who I still work with closely, will say, I'm so jealous because it says conversational AI, you get to do research more. You get to do some of that stuff that we, put against best practices because all we have right now in voice in conversational AI are best assumptions. So I get to do a little more thinking up front on the strategy as opposed to the doing right away. But the nice thing is, even once we've got that in market, and if I've set up my KPIs and I'm on my platforms that provide me with that information, I can see and say, all right, well, and I have an example of, there's a B2B client we had, and they do sonic branding. They were talking about
tell us what sonic branding is.
So sonic branding is essentially, my favorite description of it is, what is your brand when someone can't see your logo? What does your brand sound like when there are no words and there are no pictures? So what is that essence? What happens when voice and tone become real? Like actual things, as opposed to those lovely metaphors that you put into your PDF of your style guide. And that is where sonic branding, it captures the essence and the attributes, and puts it into something from an audio. And that can be anything from your Sonic logo, which everyone knows, the Intel ding, 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 ding,
or to Netflix.
Yep, exactly. You know exactly what that is. Or, the ubiquitous McDonald's, da, 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 da.
Yep.
Those are all aspects of it. But then there are parts of the DNA that become your bed music that join it across. So it's not just for voice. It's for anything with audio. You can use it as UI elements. You can use it for things like that. As part of our book, we talk about that quite a bit, where there's an example of, here's what it's like when you use the default voice, you use voice talent, we use voice talent plus sonic identity. And I can talk about it all day. If you hear it, it's a lot more exciting.
Sure. But if the imagination was given, I think there was an example of, if I wanted Cardi B, her voice to be reading off something to me, but that was always the way that brand interacted with me, I can't help but associate her name, the sound of her voice with that experience.
Correct.
And that brand.
Yeah. And it's amazing to be able to do that. Or you can own that voice and it becomes yours. And every time someone hears that, they think of that. It's sort of like, everyone knows, if you hear Morgan Freeman, there's narration going on, right? Same type of thing. So as we think through all that, we're able to learn those gaps and traps or ways to make that even better. But with this particular client, the question was, what we were covering off was, how do I get started? Right? Because that's like everyone's favorite question. And so you start with the project brief, agency folks, you all know that. We started to see in the data, what were called errors or no matches, which meant there's no answer for this one question. And some of them, I'll be honest with you, were interesting and out of bounds, and you would just accept that. But there was this one that
if I can make sure I've heard this right. So basically you did an audit or an inventory
Mhm.
of maybe all the different things that someone might care to know through their customer lifecycle. And then you
Yes.
mapped what content was, let's say, available on a website, or maybe the scripts that their call center people have. And, you're matching it up. And those were the gaps you're talking about, right? Where
Yes.
there was nothing for a particular stage that a customer's going to have a question
Yeah.
or maybe a friction in the interaction.
Yeah, absolutely. And in a voice experience, you're able to look, and you can look at your measurement and your dashboards for your platform, and it'll say, this is the question asked, this was the answer, this is the question. It's a little bit different these days in the world of LLMs, but in general, it's a little bit of if then. But these are the words that match with these things, and I will answer questions with them. And we got a no match. And the question was, what is a project brief? And we all looked at each other and went, well, duh. Of course, we just made this assumption. And it's an honest assumption, because a lot of their clientele was agencies, but they also had direct clients. And so we learned really quickly, all right, we got to take one step back and be a little more basic and put some more guiding information in there. So, we could fix it. And that's the beauty of it all, is of going back and updating it. And then that then went away. And now we're serving that audience. The cool thing is, and I very rarely call things cool, because I don't think, wouldn't it be cool as a strategy? It shouldn't be, is that because in voice, there aren't menus all the way across. You don't have to struggle with, I can have only 9 sections of my website.
True.
It's only what they ask for. So that can be sitting out there for my edge cases. I can treat my edge cases a lot more and not insult my base. If there's information where oh, well, only a newbie would care about that, then you can address the newbie and the advanced customer, because it's going to be what they ask for. It's going to be how they talk about it, which is really nice, because you do get to serve a wider swath of people without, again, showing all of the things. Which is, I love it.
Right.
Now the other,
which really trounces that dial pad paradigm that we've been stuck in. You get to 9 and then, press 0 for an operator. Right. I love that. I could have an infinite number of things that they want to know, and they don't know if they're asking number 1 or number 1001.
Right. They just know the card. Now, on the flip side, the other part of that is, so if they don't care about that thing, you'll see that no one is asking about that thing. Well, that's important information too.
Sure, as far as maybe maintaining your content, freshening it up. But as far as, do I need data to know what people are asking for or not? It sounds like a little bit like Battleship, right? I mean, there's going to be those red ones that hit. There's going to be the white ones that miss. That's okay. At least I'm getting data.
Yeah, no, exactly. And the thing of it is that all you're losing in that point is, I'm just losing one of I just used ammunition that didn't hit something. It's not, I've gone through all this effort of creating this thing and adding it to a website nav bar that then never gets touched. It's a small little piece of it. Yeah.
And clutters up an experience where it's keeping people from what they really want to get to.
Yeah. Or suppresses response.
Yeah.
That which is, that's always been a challenge of, how do I address this group without suppressing the other group? Well, this is a nice way of getting at that.
But there are things that tie into the fact that it's voice, that when you're talking about, doing this inventory and then making the different experiences work, I wouldn't want people to come away from this thinking, it's just the same as me writing web copy. The first part of it, and this was brought to light by one of the case studies you had in healthcare, where a person had first started seeing voice being used while they were a resident, finishing med school, and they frankly liked going and asking their smart speaker for a rundown on something instead of sitting through a long lecture on it. I love that. But then they grated when they went into the hospital and they saw that a orthopedic surgeon would say, all right, Mr. Drugged up patient who just came out of this procedure, here's a bunch of paperwork, read it with the FAQs on what you need to do, if something happens with your dressing or your, if you have any questions or you're feverish or whatever, and, off you go. Then they became that orthopedic surgeon that they detested for doing that, because they thought, well, why can't I use the voice tech that I love as a consumer? So it sounds like they went ahead and developed something that allows people. And what they said that stopped me in my tracks was, it's not just an FAQ, that this is something that has actually helped patients recover. The patients want to hear a voice. They know it's not their doctor's voice, but they know that it's the information that their doctor is, giving out to patients in that very situation that they're in. And it's that kind of care. Yep. It's personable, and it's not making them feel dumb. It's not making them feel like that question, is buried at the bottom of some list. Like you said, they're all flat. They're all at the same kind of level. I ask it and it's just instantly there. And that's why, I came away thinking, it's not the same. The way it's delivered has a material impact on how the customer is viewing the experience.
100%. And you can ask that same question 100 times. It's okay.
It doesn't mind.
And you can ask at 2 a.m. or you can ask at 3 p.m. That's the part of it too, instead of having to page someone or, oh, wait, their service hours are 8 a.m. till 5 p.m. Let's just hope I remember to call tomorrow, not at 5:10. 5:10, I'm going to have to call at 3 o'clock. I can. You're able to just get that immediacy, which when you're scared because, wait, is this normal with my recovery? That's the most important thing ever of, should I be getting ready to go to the ER? Oh my gosh. That is a lot of anxiety that we can remove. And that even applies to, with the other example, my other favorite one is butterball turkey. Like when you've got you're stuffing a turkey at this very moment and you have a question,
hands are,
right?
Covered.
You're covered in goo. What better than to be able to just ask an assistant, ask your smart speaker, what was the temperature I was supposed to put this in? Or how long am I allowed to leave the stuffing in before I poison my whole family? And the thing of it is with all of that, that was 50 years of questions that have been asked on their hotline. So they didn't even have to go and say, I wonder what people ask. And so, I know that frequently asked questions get a really bad rap in the digital world a lot, because sometimes we use them like an elephant boneyard, right? Oh, I don't know where this content fits on the website. Throw it in FAQs. These are actually legitimate frequently asked questions. And that's when they become actually useful again. And that's the important thing to think through. That is like, this is legit. Like if it's it will be frequently asked. So, oh, this is legit. This isn't just, how do I answer? Like, where do I put that? And to your other point, just as I would not put my brochure copy straight up on my website, although I think we did that in the beginning, just as I wouldn't do that, I sure as heck, for sure, because we didn't know. I wouldn't take my web copy and throw that into a voice experience either.
Okay, so and that's perfect. Like, there's a few things I want to unpack there. So first off, yes, the FAQs are important, lest someone think that Susan is just talking about post-purchase. She isn't. Yeah. You can throw in things like that relate to purchasing. How do I get in touch with a sales rep so that I can figure out how to buy this? It will respond to that if you have provided the proper context.
Yeah. And you can also put together a flow. This is one of the things, is lead qualification. So speed to lead is a whole, we know, hey, how do I make sure? And we all know there's tire kickers in this world. We know there's people, depending on, I'll tell you, in our business, when it comes to conversational AI, it's a long sales cycle. So we have a lot at the top of the funnel. What are those 10 questions that I always just need to have and get out of the way There are ways that we've worked with clients who've been able to start filtering that out. Let me ask you this. You know what? Sounds like where you're at. You should just sign up for our newsletter. Let me now put you, or, oh, it sounds like you're at a point where you're ready to start making decisions or talk to one of our people. We'll move you that way. And just based off of how they're answering the questions that we're asking them or going through that. You can do that before using your smart speaker, and you can even use it with your agent's voice.
Right.
You can use a robot or not. And therefore it still feels personable.
Yeah.
Although I always say if someone's talking to an agent, a virtual agent, you should let them know. And that's a whole other conversation, probably for a whole other podcast about the persona.
But I think people are getting conditioned to that, right?
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
then things like, like pitch it forward. You, at this point are happy, but you would like to then move into a human arena. That send to phone feature or, provide us with your number and call you. That through sales enablement tools can also be something that an inbound rep can receive. They can get the prompt to begin the call. And if anyone's wondering, yes, that series of questions that the person had just answered is going to appear in their CRM, all in the fields where it's supposed to be.
Yeah. And it takes a lot of, it takes some of the it's working smarter, not necessarily harder.
Yeah, that's a big load to lift. But, people that spend a lot of time each day just doing the data entry or moving from a web form, that turn and type integration that we all do, copy paste. No,
right.
You don't have to. There are a few things, though, that you said treat it as its own medium. And I wanted to come into that because you brought in a fantastic expert from a field none other than radio reporting. I think it was David Berner. So tell us what he had to say, because there's some things that he said are easy gotcha mistakes when we simply take text that reads very fine and try to put it into something that a synthesized voice is going to say.
Some of that is, and forgive me if I can't quote that verbatim, but thinking about reading it aloud and making sure that it makes sense. Conversational is more than just putting a question mark at the end of a sentence. And you'd be surprised how many folks think that. But it's making sure that you read it out. It's the pauses. It's the intonation. It's, again, it's the connotation, not just the words themselves. And that's where we talk about intent. And some of it is an assumption. But we can learn from that because we're human, and therefore we're teaching it to behave that way and understand this word and that word. We also talk a lot about, emotion and word choice with emotion. And that's one of the other things we've been looking through. Is this person really frustrated and angry? Or is this person, in a really good mood and they're okay? But if someone's coming in hot or coming in hostile, especially for customer service, I'm going to treat them a little bit different, because while my brand has a voice, the tone should adjust to the situation. So that's the other part of it too, of where we talk about tonality, and the importance of thinking that. I'll be honest. There's an example, and I don't think it's in the book, but I know of someone who works in insurance and life insurance policies. The minute someone makes the selection of I'm cashing in a policy, you bet that goes to a human. And that's not a failure of voice technology. That's human empathy of you're reporting the death of someone. And it could be, if you're on their policy, chances are it's someone close. That's when it's time for a human.
For sure.
And that's one thing I want to emphasize as well is it's not a failure of a voice bot if you start moving things to a human agent or to a different channel. The failure comes if you do it really clunky or you don't do it intentionally. And it becomes give me, like I said, when we talked at the beginning of this, I just want an agent. Just give me an agent. Yeah, then we failed. So it's a matter of how do we move that person along in that experience that we're giving them what they need and using basically the right arrows from the quill to be able to, so that they come away happy. And then that's where then you do start supporting you see your net promoter score start going up.
Right.
Because you've thought through those ways that those things connect.
Yeah, this is, some people call it, ICP. Some people call it brand persona. These are things that if you know your customer well, that suggestion to move to a human agent, you'll just intuitively know these are the right times when it needs to be, as well as tonality. These are the times where the brand doesn't want to sound bubbly and effervescent. Maybe it should sound a little more stern or sympathetic. So we need to do those things. The other part that David Berner talked about was, he said, we don't talk the way that we write. We use shorter words. And I notice this whenever I look at the transcripts of these podcasts, the grammar is terrible.
Oh, yeah.
We say things in sentence fragments, not whole sentences. So he pointed out don't, even if it reads well, where you've put a dependent phrase or a clause after something, you've got to change that if it's going to be spoken. So let's say I blew out the candles. The candles on the cake that my family gave me for my birthday. Okay, I just explained that to you, but I'm sure for the first bit where you heard candles, you were like, where's he going with that? But we would read that and not think anything of it. Or if you're quoting from something, well, you don't put the name of or the source where you're quoting at the end, because somebody's going to wonder the whole time you're speaking, what's that from? You put it at the beginning. Little things like that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's and some of that, I'll admit, is unconscious competence. After as you write these things, and that's why we wanted David to share his expertise, because sometimes we're like, conversational. And that's also where we think about intentional tone, because those long wordy phrases or that big word, the large multisyllabic words, just as it hurts readability, it also hurts listenability. As we think about that. And we think about, we also have the one breath rule. And the one breath rule is, I have to be able to say my answer in one breath. If I have to pause, then I need to think about, where are there extra words, or is someone going to remember all this? Because the cognitive load of listening is a bit harder too. So we have to think about how we break up that conversation as well. So we think about those bits, especially because a lot of times there's multitasking going on too. I would love to think that people just
especially
sit and listen.
you talk about automotive, right? So that's actually a really important one. Yes, the car has speakers and can talk to you from all angles, but you're trying to operate a vehicle while you're doing this.
Absolutely. And that was one of the things that was always so interesting about Mercedes and the Hey Mercedes Assistant. It wasn't about how do we use this cool technology. It was, well, if I can take away someone having to look down to change the temperature gauge, that means that is one less time their eyes are not on the road driving safely. And that's kind of it's an amazing thing. And then of course we're raising boats of, now we're getting to a point with geolocation where if you ask for a gas station versus when you look at it on your phone, sometimes it's going to tell you what's ahead, as opposed to the one that's like
in every direction.
Every direction. I've got to go back 10 miles. Well, I only have 15 miles worth of, gas left. So hold on a second. This isn't going to work. So, there's ways of thinking through that. And again, it's the connection of things, of how those work together.
Yeah. And again, I just know that marketers, whether they're a fan of the jobs to be done framework or again, ICPs and just building out flows, this is something that marketers are really good at. And this is why voice, if it isn't already part of their arsenal, should be in there. I want to ask one last question on privacy, which you've already touched on, but we, early in the days of especially devices that could understand our voice, there were a couple of scary mishaps. I'm thinking of Microsoft Connect with, them not clearly, putting a terms of use in there and wondering, okay, well, if I can ask it to be on, that means it's already on all the time listening. But, so the ecosystems, they've done their part, the big players, to get the public comfortable with this, get people, whether they're in an office setting and, talking about industry internal things, they're even now comfortable to have these devices around them while they work. What can we do as individual brands to not screw it up, to build on top of what the ecosystems have already done, but to also, understanding it's non-identified people, understanding that we can understand a little bit from what they're saying, but we don't want to take it so far to creep them out. Like, what would you say you want to leave our audience with on that front?
It's there's two pieces. It's transparency and it's disclosure. Those are the most important. Transparency is, here's what I'm taking, here's what I'm using. I will highly advise, ask only what you need. This isn't that is the one part of it is, don't pull biometric, don't pull a bunch of those things. Always let someone know, I will be using your voice. Is that okay? There's a couple major brands right now that in the state of Illinois, which is where I live, they're very strict. There's very strict legislation about that. If you don't do that due diligence, you can get in big trouble. So it's a matter of disclosing, here's how I'm going to use this. Which by the way isn't that how we should be doing it anyways? So that's part of that too. The one thing I do want to say, and this isn't kicking it down the road, is the digital twin that we have created up until now we live in a much more in a cookie permission world. But prior to that, we developed some pretty robust digital twins. There was a lot that's already been known. Voice was kind of the icing on the cake in some regards. But it's important to have, again, that transparency of, here's what we're going to do. Here's how we're going to use it. If I am collecting it, I'm going to give you an opportunity to say no, or give you a way to keep it local so that it's not going back to the mothership, so to speak. There was a major kerfuffle recently because Zoom in their terms and conditions had said, oh, we're going to use your data to train our AI models. Well, hold on a second. That you don't just lump that in. That needs to be its own disclosure. And they found out the hard way because 3 days later, it was, we didn't mean it like that. But the damage is done. I will say, I'm an ambassador for the Open Voice Network. We actually are a third party. We're a not-for-profit trade group. And the reason why is we don't want to rely on big tech to figure this out. Cause I'll be honest, some of us little guys comparatively, what's good for them may not be good for us. And so there's a privacy and security work group. There's an ethical work group, task force. There's a bunch of ways. They have, the mission in our credo is, voice assistance worthy of user trust. Very lofty, but what we've worked at on those things is we weigh in on GDPR and some of the European regulations. There's a whole group of experts that are working on that. The other part is the ethical side. Just recently, this past August, we released an ethics course. Now, it's not a course of do you pass ethics or not. It's here are the things you should be thinking about as you think about those ethical policies. If you don't have a data policy, you should have one regardless of if you have voice. If you don't have an AI policy, think about having an AI council to think about those policies. Those are the beginnings of where you can start to think about. And by policy, I don't mean you need to get lawyers and all that involved, but you should have a point of view and you should have a thought of where you're going to do with it and have protocols of how often do we dump this data? How do we collect it? These are thoughts you should have. And what we have right now is when we're working through, in the ethics course, which is by the way free. So you can go to the Open Voice Network. You can Google that and they'll be able to put you in contact with, I believe it's done through the Linux Foundation's edX platform. It gives you some thoughts about what are the thought starters of how I'm using AI, how I'm using voice AI. What am I collecting? What am I using? And to start, give some frameworks. And there are some self-assessment checklists that are also available to help you with being able to do that. Cause it's not fair to say be ethical and then not give anyone the guardrails of what does that really mean?
Yeah. And as you said, giving that comparison of imagine that you knew about what SEO was like just as SEO was starting. This is the same vein we're in here. So I share your view. Nobody should be worried about a lawyer tapping them on the shoulder. What they would instead be wise to do is document and put some thought on the ethical front in, and that will be a wonderful thing to have as things get farther, as maybe we see a few, let's say, test cases come through where the boundaries are starting to be defined and where we can then get more clarity. But I think at this point, a company whose intent is noble on using voice, even if they maybe make a misstep, if they're as you said, with those two hallmarks, transparency and disclosure, as long as they're doing that, customers and regulators will probably be understanding because of where we are in the adoption here. And that will keep you ahead of the game.
Absolutely. Our research has shown us, I will say, just to add that little bit, I know we're close to time. We did research because when we do the Voice Consumer Index, one of the questions is, what are your barriers? And privacy and trust is a concern. That is lessening as people become more comfortable with it. And so it is thinking through that though, but it never goes away completely. So it's a matter of being proactively and intentionally prepared as opposed to the gotchas. That's the important thing.
Fantastic. Susan, you've given us a ton here. The book has even more. If people want to find out about Pragmatic Digital, reach out maybe personally, where would you send them?
Our website is pragmatic.digital. So easy peasy. I'm also fairly active on Twitter and LinkedIn. As is my co-founder / husband, Scott with 1 T, Westwater, and just my name on LinkedIn. And then on Twitter, I'm at SJW75. And you can also look up the book on Amazon or it's through major retailers. We also have a website, voicemarketingbook.ai, where you can also learn a little bit more about the book. And you can also then link out to go to Amazon or elsewhere.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's given me, and I'm sure people listening here, a way to figure out how they can make their marketing even better.
Thanks for listening. Follow the show on Twitter at Funnel Reboot. If you like what you have heard today, please consider leaving a review wherever you get your podcasts.